Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Can It Take a K26, the show where we take a variety of blasters and see if they can be upgraded using a K26 spring, and if not, what they can be upgraded with. That's a new feature. I am your host, Captain Xavier, and this episode we're going to cover two Doomlands blasters that were previously overlooked or unavailable, starting with the Lawbringer. The Lawbringer was originally released in 2015 as part of the Doomlands series. It is a hammer-primed revolver that holds 12 rounds, has dart holders in the stock, and two sections of rail, though they are in line, so I'm not sure why they would have two, but rail is rail. And it's ergonomically, in my opinion, horrific. This particular section right here that is completely empty and serves no purpose gets right in your finger there when you have larger hands. But other than that, I actually really like it, and I've been wanting to do the minimized version of it, take the barrel off, take the stock off, and make a ridiculous 12-round pistol out of it. I even have a blaster or a holster that I think would probably fit it, so that will probably be on my list of personal builds in the next couple of months, and then I'll, of course, try to make the stock into a standard stock attachment because it holds a dozen rounds, which is cool. But today we want to know if it can take a K26, so let's find out. We're gonna go straight to the... Alright, we are in, and the mechanism does just lift right out, so that's nifty. And yeah, it pretty much looks exactly like a hammer shot. Other than, you know, the minor cosmetic and all that differences. One thing that does appear to be really, really nice is it doesn't look like they solvent welded the shell sections together. It looks like they actually would come apart for ease of painting, which is neat, since the cool thing about the Doomlands line is it's great for steampunk and dieselpunk cosplay. So it's nice that they made it easy for you to disassemble and paint. So that is neat. Someday I may try to actually alter this, cut this, and put my own plate there to cover up the hole and get rid of that unpleasant section. I'll definitely do that if I were to mod this and paint it for myself. So, alright, let us see what we can do with this spring. Now, quite obviously it's not going to take a K26. That's laughable to try to fit a K26 in here. It's just not going to interact with anything at all. So interestingly, it wasn't as far-fetched as I thought. It'll kind of fit in the housing. You would have to curl this in so that it would catch on this ring or add a larger washer. The problem is that it's just a little bit too big and the shell won't actually close. The other thing is the length of K26 that you can fit in here is actually weaker than the stock spring. I think. The hammer shot springs are remarkably powerful. We're going to see what else we could put in here. This is a hammer shot spring, and they are in fact identical. It's exactly the same spring, which means you could use any of the springs that they use to upgrade hammer shots that come with like the Gavin Fuzzy kit or the metal kit. Those springs will work in a Lawbringer and allow you to upgrade it. But I wanted to see if I had any springs that could be added to it and still catch and still get enough compression. So I had a couple of potential candidates, and unfortunately, I have no idea where they came from. They were just in the bin, which is, I know, not useful information to use, but I have no idea what this is, but it is the same diameter as the top of the spring. These springs actually are tapered. The top up here is much thicker. It's almost a whole coil thicker. And this one is the same diameter as the upper part, so if you put it on over it, it doesn't interfere with the original spring, and it does engage with the stop at the top of the plunger rod, or the spring rod, which is fabulous. So if you don't happen to have a spring that just absolutely perfectly fits over your stock spring and gives you a little bit more power, the other option is you can get a 3/8, couple of 3/8 lock washers. There are a couple of pennies at a hardware store, maybe 35 cents or so. And you can stack a couple of them, and they will fit over the rod and will add additional pre-compression to your spring. Now this will give you more power, but do keep in mind it will also shorten the life of the spring because pre-compression obviously is constant stress that's on the spring and will wear on it over time. But if you're planning to eventually upgrade to a heavier spring anyway, this will work in the interim. Now when you compress the spring, you get a little bit more compression and it gives you a little bit more power. And however many you feel like putting in, that is entirely up to you. Alright, now in my New Year's video I said that I was going to avoid doing blasters that I knew the results of. And this is one of those where I knew it wasn't going to be able to take a K26. So to make up for knowing the results going in, I've done some science that will hopefully help some of you out. So I tested it in 3 different settings to get you some numbers to see what you might want to try. The stock FPS came in at about 60, and the range was about 55 with a maximum of 60, which isn't terribly impressive, but again, this is basically a hammer shot, and the hammer primed blasters have never had the most impressive of ranges. They have other benefits. But when I put the extra spring in it, which is currently in there, it came in at 70 FPS, so we had an increase of 10, which is reasonable, and the range went to an average of 60 with a max of 65. So we didn't gain a whole lot of range, but there wasn't a whole lot of modding involved to get that range. So it's an easy upgrade if you can find that spring. And unfortunately, I have no idea what that spring is from. I have heard that Tech 6 springs will work. I haven't tested that myself. But just adding a spring that was big enough to fit around the stock spring gave a 10 increase in FPS and a 5 increase in range. So that's not too bad. I then also tested it using the washer mod. I did 3 lock washers above the spring to pre-compress it, and that got the exact same results. So 70 FPS and an average of 60 feet. There are pros and cons to both of those possible upgrades, of course. The spring modification, you have to find the spring, and that is a little bit more difficult and maybe a little bit more expensive. The washer upgrade, you're looking at less than $1 worth of lock washers from pretty much any hardware store anywhere. The downside to that modification is that you are pre-compressing the spring, which is like having the blaster partially primed all of the time. And that is going to eventually wear out the spring. If you've ever left a blaster primed for long periods of time, you know that it ruins the spring completely. And that while this isn't fully compressing it, it is partially compressing it. And over time, that will eventually wear out the spring. But if you were planning to eventually buy an upgrade spring, which you can because this uses the exact same spring as the hammer shot, so there are upgrade springs out there, that would be a very cheap short-term modification that you could do until you can afford the more expensive one. And upgrade springs aren't terribly expensive, but, you know, money is money, and you also can't buy the springs in a hardware store, whereas you can buy the washers in a hardware store. You might actually be able to, in some Ace hardwares, find a spring that will work. So you can look into that. So there's all the numbers for the Lawbringer. I've left it with the upgraded spring in it because that is really the better option. And I do plan to eventually minimize it. I will take the stock off and make this into a standard Nerf stock attachment, and I will take the barrel off because I believe I have a pouch that will serve as a perfect holster for this. So this would also be a viable option for my gunslinger loadout, to have a hammer shot on one hip and this on the other, because it's the Lawbringer. It's a great name. I do a little bit of painting. I would paint up the clear spots and throw my logo on here somewhere, and I would try to clean up this little bulky, unnecessary, flared section here that just digs into my hand and is uncomfortable. But it shouldn't be too difficult, really, to cut that away and make plates that cover it. Or I might not. It may turn out that once you don't have the handle back here, that you're able to more easier grip it. So we will see. Anyway, that's the word on the Lawbringer. Let's move on to our next contestant. Our next contestant is the much requested Judge. This thing is enormous and ridiculous and fantastic. The Judge was originally released in 2017 as part of the Doomlands line, obviously. And it is a enormous revolver, shotgun pump style, and it fires 3 darts at once. So it's quite magnificent. It's also absolutely ridiculously enormous and fabulous in that regard. The downside is once you get it actually put together, it really doesn't like coming back apart. Fortunately, this was given to me without it actually being assembled, so it's going to be easier. And we want to know if it can take a K26. Now, my original thought was, of course, surely not. That's ridiculous. The whole priming mechanism will never handle it. But then I realized that it fires 3 darts at once, like the Sledgefire does, and the Sledgefire's stock spring is actually heavier than K26. So I may have misjudged the judge. So we're going to open this thing up and actually determine whether or not it can take a K26. Okay, so we're in, and you can see the complicated mess that is the internals of the judge. There is a whole fabulous gear ratio system in here. You've got the priming arm, which goes to a gear, which goes to a gear, which forces things back. So that's the delicate bits. This is the part that I'm worried about, obviously, is that failing on me. Alright, now we get to try to get into the internals. Alright, we're going to try something. The only reason K26 is not fitting is because of these tabs on these sides. Now the tabs in the back are part of the alignment of the mechanism, but these tabs on the front are just for structural support. So I'm going to take them off and see what happens. I do love it when I am surprised on this show, and today is another day. The judge can take a K26, and doesn't even seem to be that much harder of a prime. You can definitely hear the difference, and we'll get some numbers here in a second. All right, after firing copious amounts of darts around my alley, I've got the numbers. This thing's stock numbers, it came in at 50 FPS and 35 feet range, which is thoroughly unimpressive. For something this big, you really would expect more out of it. But there's a lot of reasons that people were not particularly impressed by this blaster. However, it can take a K26, and with K26, it was getting 60 FPS and was up to 40 feet of range with a max of 47. And that isn't so bad. It's not a huge increase, but it's enough. I mean, you're looking at least 10 feet, give or take. Sometimes only 5, but that's a little bit better for something that's supposed to be a shotgun. Shotguns are supposed to be short range, and this thing does have the advantage of being so huge you can use it as a shield. But yeah, I was actually surprised that it could take a K26. I wasn't expecting the priming gear whole system to be able to handle it. It's not a significantly heavier prime, so I wasn't ever worried that it was going to break. It is more stress than the blaster was originally designed for, so it will wear it out faster. I have no idea how fast. I'm not going to stress test it and prime it until it breaks. But it would definitely reduce the life of the blaster just because that's not what it was designed for. So, there you have it. Those are the numbers. Let's recap. Alright, for those of you just tuning in or who just skipped to the end to see the results, that was a no for the Lawbringer, but yes to either a spring upgrade or a washer upgrade, both of which gave the exact same increase. Both have pros and cons, of course, but it'll also take any upgrade that the Hammershot can as far as springs goes, because it's identical spring to the Hammershot. And that was a yes to the judge, and I will admit to being slightly surprised by that. I was not expecting the internals to be able to support K26, but it turns out the stock spring is really very, very beefy. The increase was noticeable, not, stellar as some upgrades have been, but enough that I think it would be worth it if you really wanted to run this, because, I mean, it's a huge and impractical blaster, but it also works as a shield if your group doesn't count blaster tags. And it is, a pump action, 10 shot, 3 shot at a time shotgun. So, I mean, it's got its places, possibly in close quarters if you were playing indoors in an arena. This thing would actually have an inordinate amount of firepower in a situation like that, and putting K26 would give you just a little bit more range and a little bit more speed, so make it a little bit harder to dodge and let you reach out there a little bit more. So I think both of these are worth upgrading. Both of them, the whole Doomlands line has always been cosmetically interesting. They're obviously designed with kind of a post-apocalyptic LARP in mind, what with Doomlands 2169, and they really do have that feel. I prefer them to the more made out of junk look of the Zombie Strike line. These ones do also look slightly cobbled together, but they look more professionally cobbled together. And there's a lot of opportunity for cosplay paint jobs and so forth within the Doomlands line, and I appreciate that from Nerf. They're not always the most practical blasters, but with the right modifications and in the right situation, any blaster can be useful. So, there you have it. If you have any suggestions, comments, concerns, requests for next week, go ahead and put them in the comments section below, and thank you guys for watching.